Hi everyone. Today I'll be telling you about AWS Fargate service. You might already be aware about the AWS ECS service, which manages container orchestration for you. So first we need to understand the different ECS deployment models. So before understanding Fargate, let us understand the major deployment models that we have. So there are two major models for how to run your containers on AWS. So the first one is EC2, where we deploy and manage our own cluster of EC2 instances for running the containers. So this means that here we need to manage our EC2 instances on our own. And the next one is AWS Fargate, where we run containers without any EC2 instances. So we don't need to worry about any EC2 instances that are running. We just need to worry about the tasks. So why AWS Fargate? AWS Fargate allows you to run containers without having to manage servers or clusters. With AWS Fargate, you no longer have to provision, configure, and scale clusters of virtual machines to run your containers. This removes the need to choose server types, decide when to scale your clusters, or optimize your cluster packing. AWS Fargate removes the need for you to interact with or think about servers or clusters. Fargate lets you focus on designing and building your applications instead of managing the infrastructure that runs them. So think of it as a container on demand with no underlying manually created infrastructure. How cool is that? And that too, this infrastructure is quick to launch and scale. So where you manage everything at the container level only. So Fargate determines the correct amount of compute resources which are required, which means you don't need to worry about selecting instances types or having to scale the cluster capacity. So how does AWS Fargate work? To utilize Fargate to manage the deployment of your application container, you will need to have a container stored in a container registry like ECR or Docker Hub. In our case, it will be ECR, and set up a task and cluster via ECS. The steps in the deployment cycle are: first, you need to build a container image. Next, you need to host it in a registry, that is Amazon ECR. Then you need to choose an orchestration service, which will be ECS in our case. Then you need to create a cluster taking the AWS Fargate option. So your container image is a read-only template that can be built from a Docker file, which contains your code, right? So it also contains many things like system libraries, tools, runtime, and other dependencies required by your application to deploy. Once in the registry, your container can be pulled into a cluster instance to be run whenever required. So how to set up this? To set up the container to run using ECS, you will need to set up a task definition first. Typically, a task definition is a file containing a blueprint of the requirements of settings needed to run the container. I'll show you in the coming demo. Container definitions like the image type, memory, CPU, and network mode. So this is a very good image of how does Fargate work. So this is your AWS ECR where you store your images, and this is the uh, ECS service. It pulls the image from ECR, and then you need to define your application using a task definition or something like that. Then these task definition will used to deploy the containers on EC2 or AWS Fargate, and then those containers will be managed by ECS, right? So let me show you a quick demo. So this is our ECS page, and if you want to create a cluster using AWS Fargate, then you need to click on Get Started. Here you can see that we have our diagram, and okay. So in order to create a cluster through AWS Fargate, we need to click on Get Started, and then you can choose any of this. For the sake of simplicity, I'll be choosing the Nginx instance, the Nginx app. So here you can see that the task definition, it is giving you a task definition by default. It has different network modes. We are choosing AWS VPC, which is very good for AWS Fargate mode. Then we'll be creating a new IAM role, and then the compatibilities are for Fargate and the task memory and the CPU. Now, let's go to next. So the service name that we'll give is Nginx service. We'll just give one task for initial, and then we'll automatically create a security group, and we don't need a load balancer too. Okay, so let's put our cluster name as demo cluster. Next. Now we need to just verify these settings, and then we need to create our application. So it might take some time. Okay, so our ECS cluster is ready. Let's view the service. So as you can see here, this is our Nginx service. And if we go to the cluster level details, there are no ECS instances running. That means no EC2 instances are attached to this cluster. So we just need to pay for the task that we use. Only one task is running, as you can see here, running task count. So it is one task which is running. And if we go to the task, click IP, so you can see here, welcome to Nginx. Now, this is our cluster. Now let's say we need to create a task definition. Okay, so let's say we need to use our ECR repo to create a new task definition. Okay, so what we need to do is that we need to go to the task definitions. We need to, this is our first run task definition. So let's create a new task definition. Let's say Fargate. Next step, enter a name, sample task, select a role, operating system Linux, CS task execution role 0.5 GB, 0.25. Now we need to add the container. So here we add our container. Let's go first to ECR and check for, okay, so we have our container here. This is our container. Let's copy its image. Okay, container repository, container name. So container name will be Ubuntu software met 125 8 MB. Let's put it as 512 MB. Container port, we are mapping port 80 to 80. Add port mapping, no, not this one. And let's leave everything as default. Okay. So let's click on create. And we can see that our task definition is created. Now, if we view our task definition, we can see here that, let's go to task definition, sample task, then run our task. So as you can see here, we have options Fargate, EC2 and external, Linux, choose our cluster, only one cluster demo. We need one task extra, and yep, that's it. Okay, subnets. Okay, so let's go to our demo cluster and refresh it. As we can see here, we have one provisioning task and it will soon be in running state. So we are not paying for any EC2 instances that we are using. So we are only paying for the task. We only need to worry about the tasks. So yeah, that's it about AWS Fargate. Thank you.